Here we go with the first part of Chapter 5 of Gooney Bird Greene. On Tuesday, all of the children, including Felicia Ann, arrived at school early, even Malcolm, who had never been early before. Tricia had a flower in her hair. Ben was wearing a vest. Keiko had a tiny bit of pink lipstick on her lips, and Barry Tuckerman was wearing a polka dot bow tie. "Good morning, class," Mrs. Pigeon said. "Don't you all look nice today?" "You do too, Mrs. Pigeon," the children said, and Mrs. Pigeon blushed. "Well," she said, "I thought I'd wear my new shoes today." Usually Mrs. Pigeon wore soft, comfortable shoes, but today she was wearing very shiny, high-heeled shoes with gold buckles. The principal, Mr. Leroy, made announcements on the intercom. He announced a bake sale and a birthday and a meeting of the crossing guards. A fifth-grade boy read a poem about Christopher Columbus over the intercom. Everyone in the school said the Pledge of Allegiance together. Then it was time for school to begin. But Gooney Bird wasn't there. "Well," Mrs. Pigeon said, "let's take our social studies books out, class. Let's turn to the chapter called Cities." "But Gooney Bird isn't here," Nicholas called. "No," Mrs. Pigeon said, "she isn't. She seems to be absent today. Maybe she's sick." The class was silent. The room seemed sad. The lights seemed dim. Even the gerbils, who usually scurried noisily around in their cage, they were very subdued. George Washington, in his portrait on the wall, looked as if he might cry any minute. Slowly the children took their social studies books from their desks and turned to the chapter called Cities. Keiko began to cry very quietly. "I don't want to do social studies," she whimpered. "I feel too sad." Malcolm crawled under his desk and curled up in a ball. Suddenly, the door to the room burst open. "It's Gooney Bird!" everyone called. The lights seemed to brighten, the gerbils began to run in a circle, and George Washington seemed to smile. Gooney Bird was out of breath. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said. "I am never, ever late for anything. I always set 3 alarm clocks, and I lay out my clothes the night before, and I even put toothpaste on my toothbrush before I go to bed so that I can brush my teeth quickly in the morning. But today—" "Wait," she said. "I have to catch my breath." She stood there in front of the class and took a few deep breaths. "There," she said. "I'm fine now." She smoothed her red hair, which was flying about, and tucked it behind her ears. Today, Gooney Bird was wearing gray sweatpants, a sleeveless white blouse with lace on the collar, and amazing black gloves that came up above her elbows. "This morning," she explained, "I quite unexpectedly had to direct an orchestra." "An orchestra?" asked Mrs. Pigeon. "Yes, a symphony orchestra." Mrs. Pigeon smiled. "Well, I hear all sorts of interesting excuses for being late, but I've never heard that one before." "I believe I'm unique," Gooney Bird said. "Yes, you are, indeed. Did you wear your gloves when you were directing the orchestra?" "Yes," said Gooney Bird. "As a matter of fact, I did. I found them very helpful." All of the second graders had their hands in the air and were pretending to lead orchestras. Even Malcolm was back in his seat, using 2 pencils as orchestra batons. Gooney Bird headed toward her desk. She looked around at the other children's open books. "I see we're in the middle of social studies," she said. Mrs. Pigeon slipped one foot out of a high-heeled shoe and rubbed it with her hand. Then she put her shoe back on. "Actually," she said, "I think the class would appreciate it if we held story time a little early today." "Yay!" called all the children, and they closed up their social studies books. "A Gooney Bird story?" Gooney Bird asked. "Yes," said Mrs. Pigeon. "Yes," called all the children. Gooney Bird smoothed her long gloves. She went back up to the front of the room. "Which one would you like today?" she asked. "How Catman was consumed by a cow?" "I'd certainly like to hear about Catman and the cow sometime," Mrs. Pigeon said. "Maybe tomorrow. But this morning, I'd like to hear one called Why Gooney Bird Was Late for School Because She Had to Direct a Symphony Orchestra." "Oh," Gooney Bird said. "All right, I could tell that." "And it will be absolutely true?" asked Mrs. Pigeon. "Of course," Gooney Bird said. "Have you forgotten? All of my stories are absolutely true." Then she curtsied and began. Why Gooney Bird was late for school because she was directing a symphony orchestra. Once upon a time, in fact it was just this morning, Gooney Bird Greene got up and got dressed in the clothes that she had carefully laid out the night before. She ate her breakfast, brushed her teeth with her pre-pasted toothbrush, gathered up her homework, put on her elbow-length gloves, and started off to the Water Tower Elementary School. Gooney Bird interrupted herself. She explained to the teacher and the class, sometimes stories start in the most ordinary way. Then they become exciting when something unexpected happens. Don't you find that to be true? The children nodded, thinking about their favorite stories. Like Where the Wild Things Are, Ben suggested. Or Little Red Riding Hood, Beanie said, when the wolf appears and you don't expect it. Oh, I'm so scared of the wolf, Keiko whispered loudly. Every time the wolf appears, I... Shh, the children said. Gooney Bird continued. Gooney Bird walked down Park Street and turned the corner onto Walnut Street. And when she was halfway down Walnut Street, halfway to school, suddenly, she paused. I've explained before, she said, about the word suddenly. It makes things exciting. Sometimes, class, if you're creating a story and you get stuck, just say the word suddenly, and you won't have any trouble continuing at all. What a good idea, Mrs. Pigeon said. We should start a list called Writing Tips. What happened suddenly on Walnut Street, Gooney Bird? Gooney Bird continued. And I'm going to stop there, and then I'll continue the rest of Chapter 5 in the next section.